The mystery surrounding the 12th planet and the Sumerians. The following text belongs to the friendly reader Athenaeus of the Plus page, and I found it very interesting since the writer, I'm posting it once, he was kind enough to send it to me. If the Latin language is dead, then Sumerian is in the stage of reincarnation. We're talking about a very old language, an ancient culture, apparently a very large civilization that flourished in the area now called southern Mesopotamia. Sumerian writing is the oldest known and was cuneiform. In my opinion, it's not the oldest, but maybe later we'll explain. The serious Sumerians spoke and wrote in their language in the 3rd millennium BC, and linguists have failed to prove any relation of the Sumerian language to any other language. The Sumerian language also has its nuances and is divided into 4 periods and forms: in the Archaic, in the Old or Classical, and in the New and in the Post-Sumerian. The Archaic period begins around 3100 and ends around 2500 BC and is represented by commercial, administrative, as well as by school texts. Yes, sir, if we had sweated until we learned My Bright Moon, think that the Sumerian bobbers would have pulled off with the cuneiform lingo. That's the bright moon is what we a little poem that children say in Greek. Now, the particular form of Sumerian is terribly difficult, and many linguists had thrown up their hands and engaged in toys like Egyptian hieroglyphs. Few are those who studied persistently and diligently and finally understood the Sumerian script. One of them is Zecharia Sitchin, a Jewish scholar and great student of the Old Testament since childhood. Sitchin had not made the mistake that many did and do, that is, to study the text from translations. Not even the modern Hebrew translation was enough for Sitchin. He learned ancient Hebrew and read the originals. He was crazy about Genesis, which opened new or old but closed roads for him. Another small parenthesis: no translation can fully convey the meaning of the original due to the lack of a specific word that conveys exactly a certain meaning in the language into which the text is being translated. A nearby word is often used, or a word that, according to the translator, conveys a desired meaning. And then there's a problem, not to say that there is a rape or slaughter of the meaning. This problem is particularly acute in the translation and interpretation of various Aramaic Christian and Old Testament texts. When the Aramaic original happened to disappear, then it was running around. When enough of this topic for now, the parenthesis closes. Zecharia Sitchin, therefore, like a proper person that he is, sat down and learned the languages in which the texts that interested him were written. He had said many things about various texts and findings, but although he was not characterized as a writer, many did not pay attention to his words, especially regarding the mystery of the Sumerians. It's worth writing here a question he submitted in his book Genesis Revisited. Is it possible that humanity, he said, having overcome the Dark Ages and Middle Ages, reached the Renaissance, experienced the Industrial Revolution, entered the era of high technology, of genetic engineering and space travel, simply to reach ancient knowledge, end quote. Sitchin's vindication came with Voyager 2 spaceflight. Let's look at that briefly. Voyager 2 was launched by NASA August 20th, 1977, 16 days before Voyager 1 was launched. Its original destination was Saturn, but due to a rare arrangement of the planets, the Americans decided to send it beyond. The pull of properly placed Jupiter and Saturn could, after the necessary rotations, throw Voyager 2 into the very distant Uranus and from there into the mysterious Neptune. That's why Voyager 2 launched 2 weeks before Voyager 1, to catch the correct arrangement of these planets. The planets Uranus and Neptune are too far away. Scientists could only assume certain things, such as their composition, color, rings, satellites, etc. Sitchin, however, did not hesitate to write about the 2 planets in great detail, and shortly before the launch of Voyager 2, to go on television and say, you will see this and that, and you are wrong about that because you will find that instead of that, etc. So Voyager 2 flew past Jupiter July 1939, 2 years after launch, and said hello to Saturn within another 2 years. Saturn flew to Uranus, and which it reached January 1986, and from there it set its course for Neptune, where it would end its journey in 1989, 12 years after the launch. My God, just as the Sumerians had described it. That is what Zecharia Sitchin shouted, seeing the pictures of the planet Uranus that Voyager 2 began to send to Earth in 1986, 9 years after its launch by NASA. Its blue-green color matched the description of the Sumerian texts, whose civilization flourished about 5,000 years ago in Mesopotamia, in the neighborhood of the biblical Garden of Eden. And it was not only the color of the planet, but also many other things, mainly its composition. Scientists expected to find gas, but the Sumerians had written water, and they were absolutely right. Blue-green water with bubbles, like the bubbles created by dark algae under the surface of the sea. An appearance completely different from all other planets. Sit down a minute. The planet Uranus is about 2 billion miles from Earth. It is not visible with the naked eye. Astronomers did not know of its existence until 1781, when the musician and amateur astronomer Friedrich Herschel discovered it with the most perfect telescope of his time. So how did the Sumerians know so much detail about this particular planet at a time when they were not entitled to know? The ancients knew of the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. How and where did they know about a planet that is too far away that its light takes 4 hours to travel to our eyes? And what are these stupid suggestions that the Sumerians not only knew about Uranus, but also about the more distant Neptune and Pluto? For the small and insignificant Pluto, that is so far away that from its surface the sun appears as a bright star. And yet they knew. And Zecharia Sitchin did not wait for the various space explorations and discoveries to say it, but put his head in the carniola to write the book The 12th Planet in 1976, a year before the launch of Voyager 2, and a full 10 years before the spacecraft photographed the planet Uranus. Of course, the planets Uranus and Neptune are occasional because Sitchin ends up elsewhere. What we are primarily interested in is, however, how did the ancient civilizations know, even 5,000 years ago, things about the time that modern science is only now discovering? This question goes hand in hand with the question concerning the primitive tribe in Mali, the Dogon, whose tradition refers to Sirius, and the knowledge of this was unknown until 1862, and invisible to the naked eye or a simple telescope companion, white dwarf Sirius B, but also its third companion, Sirius C, that scientists assume exists. Talk about creepy details. The Dogon knew this way before. In both cases, and the most likely version, at least for the extremists, is that extraterrestrials had once visited Earth and taught these things to the civilization that at that time was in command. Over the years, they said, everything ended up in myths and traditions. The arrival of aliens is no longer taboo. Countless books have been written claiming that not only did they once come, not only did they come and go all the time, but that they made official contact, quote unquote, of one kind or another, which the planet lords kept secret for reasons they and we know better. In the case of the Sumerian aliens, however, we are not simply talking about goodbye and good luck, but about anthropogeny, about an imminent end all over again. And we're talking about the existence of a planet in our solar system, a planet that does not revolve around the sun like all the others, but very obliquely with an elliptical orbit that brings it to our layers every 3,600 years, where it causes massive destruction for a planet that behaves like a comet. But that's why there was huge concern when comet Hale-Bopp was discovered. There had been giant stir for many of those who are convinced of the existence of another planet, though that this was Hale-Bopp. Sitchin, however, told them it's not Hale-Bopp, it's a harbinger. The real giant is coming soon, or something like that, he said. The existence of another planet is not speculation, its discovery is expected, as was the discovery of the planet called Pluto when it was finally found in 1930 by astronomer Clyde Tobel. Except Pluto does not fit the bill. It's too small to cause the anomalies observed in the orbits of Uranus and especially Neptune. Something else is out there, quote unquote, that we don't know about, perhaps because of a strange orbit. But sooner or later, says Sitchin, we will know it. Perhaps then will be the time when some serious and respectable books will be torn up and will not even serve as kindling in the fireplace. According to those who deal with the Sumerians, and especially according to Zachariah Sitchin, the next visit is expected around 2012. Was expected 2012. And it concerns us many times. There's not the slightest doubt, not even to discuss it. That is, once something big has passed through our solar system and caused several anomalies, now whether this something passed once and then disappeared into the depths of space, or dissipated or passes every now and then, that we do not know, or do we suspect based on other more recent evidence? We'll see that later. Now, maybe we'll find out once and for all soon enough. Let's look at the evidence, or at least strong evidence, of the invasion of this mysterious celestial body. Of course, there are many indications, but we will see 2 or 3 of the most serious ones concerning the giant planets Uranus and Neptune and their natural satellites. We start with Neptune. Until recently, astronomers knew of only 2 natural satellites of the liquid planet, satellites Triton and Nereus. Nereus had a very strong shape. It was like a crooked donut, strange shape, crooked donut. According to the laws of planetary creation and evolution, the laws of dynamics, Nereus should have been spherical in shape like our moon and all the planets. But it is not. It was deformed, and now a skeptic might say, so what happened? The natural satellite of Mars, Phobos, is shaped like a potato. Why should not Nereus be like a crooked donut? Sly question, but not very wrong. It's a matter of size. Phobos is non-existent compared to Nereus, and fits thousands of times the volume of Nereus. We're not talking about the same thing. According to the laws of nature, Nereus should have been spherical, and the issue is not moot. So the skeptic can say it just happened. Good. However, it's also the rotation angle of Nereus around Neptune. We're not talking about something small, but about a deviation of up to 28 degrees. If we take as a base the equator of Neptune, that's how it happened, insists the skeptic. Let's take a look at Nereus, very strange in its orbit, which brings it back and forth from 1 million to 6 million miles from Neptune. In short, the natural satellite of the planet with a visible magnetic field behaves very strangely, which we'll look at later. Those in the know would expect Nereus to circle Neptune rather than have such an elliptical orbit. Doesn't that the explanation of the space quorum make sense? That something hit Nereid, sending it far out, too far out, but before it could, the satellite could escape unruly into space, it was held back by Neptune's pull, which combined with the violent carom stuck her in such an elliptical orbit. Nah, says the skeptic. That's how it happened. Let's say the other thing then. Mr. Skeptic, on one side of Nereus is white and brilliant, and the other side Nereus is black and not because of darkness. Do you know what that means, Mr. Skeptic? That it was hit by something unknown, and during the collision, either half of its surface was shaved, revealing the dark-colored subsoil, or with the collision, the other body left on Nereus a lot of its own matter, which was dark in color. Exactly what happens in car crashes. Nah, that's how it happens, insists the skeptic. Be careful, Mr. Skeptic. If your white wife gets pregnant and drives and gives birth to a boy, I hope it does not beat her to the woods before she leaves the maternity ward. Don't divorce her. Name the baby Haralambo or Panayotis instead of Nelson or Wilson. And when you pick it up and go for ice cream, don't say it's the maid's or that you adopted it but that it's yours. That's how it happened. A mere meteorite could not cause such a great change. We're talking about something big and bulky, something that did not fall into Neris and then disintegrate, but something that, because of its bulk, might be intact and still out there somewhere. It's possible that we're talking about Nibiru of the Sumerians, the 12th planet. It's not that Neris had and the abnormalities of its shape and orbit that suggest a collision with a very large and unknown to us celestial body. Neptune's other natural satellite, Triton, has its own quirks. After the approach of Neptune by Voyager 2, and based on the information sent by NASA by the Pride of Neptune, Triton is not a genuine child of the giant planet, but it's adopted. 4 leading Caltech scientists, and here we're not talking about university and plate scientists, but we're talking about the credible scientists, wrote in the journal Science that Triton had been torn from a heliocentric orbit due to a space collision. So let's see what they say. Triton revolved around the sun. It was not a satellite of some planet. Suddenly something hits it. It slows down the rotation speed and keeps firmly in orbit around the sun, causing it to be grabbed by Neptune's pull and from a planet, Triton, to become its satellite. Neptune. The theories that Triton was the satellite of Neptune from the beginning collapsed. The temperature at its center measured by Voyager 2, as well as its battered surface, reinforces the view that Triton was involved in a big space collision, and more, it collided with something huge. So what hit Triton? It could also have been a small moon of Neptune that was disintegrated in the collision, swallowed by the relatively large Triton, but maybe not. It might have been struck by this mystery by something else, the 12th planet, or one of its moons, the unknown planet X, that visits us every now and then, and about which the Sumerians have written so much 60 centuries ago. According to the Sumerians, or at least according to the interpretation of their texts by Zechariah Sitchin and others, the relative end of the world will not be the result of the wrath of some God, Yahweh, who has nothing better to do than to make and destroy worlds, but it will be the result of the approach of an unknown planet that moves very strangely and that comes every 3,600 years to our layers. There can be no doubt that the Sumerians say it plainly. If the translation of their exceedingly difficult writing is correct, they have written a whole epic about Noah's flood. Of course, they did not call him Noah. They had baptized him differently. But both the hero and the event are not very different from the biblical flood, which, of course, is not very different from the flood of the Greek Dephkalion, meaning the man of good omen, and the name Noah is the man of good omen. And probably the original one, which needs a separate analysis because basically of the dove that brought Noah the olive branch, but it is not of the present. Now, what difference are the circumstances? The scientific evaluation of the Sumerian texts suggests that the 12th planet, when it approached the Earth, passed between the orbits of Saturn and Jupiter, created such a tremor that the Antarctic ice sheets slipped and fell into the ocean. On the one hand, a huge tidal wave that was created, and on the other hand, the theoretical rise in sea level that followed the melting of the ice caused what is referred to in the Old Testament as Noah's flood. Antarctica, of course, froze again, and the volume and weight of its ice is increasing significantly with each passing year. It's estimated that ice equivalent in volume to Lake Ontario is added to Antarctica each year. We're talking about theoretical quantities, and leave aside the theories about the warming of the planet and the melting of the ice. Either the ice is increasing or it's melting. Both together cannot happen. Let the scientists decide and come to a conclusion. The enormous weight of the ice must have dissolved the surface of the Earth's crust on which it sits. There must be a lot of volatility, with a great jolt pull by the ice below, or rather by the ocean. And then, when this is leader expected to pass between the two planets again, very soon. This, however, is not the main theme of the Sumerian texts. The main issue is the origin of man, or rather his creation by the Nephilim, the extraterrestrials who, according to the Sumerians, knew of the coming deluge because they had calculated the effects of the attraction of their planet Nibiru, of Marduk, of the Babylonians, and as soon as the ice fell into the ocean, they let their creations and slaves drown like mice, but all but one and his family, Ziusudra Utnapishtim, who is named the same as Noah of the Jews. The Sumerians believed that the extraterrestrial Nephilim from the planet Nibiru had made man to work in the gold mines of Earth. The Nephilim needed the gold to scatter particles of it in Nibiru's stratosphere to reflect a percentage of the sun's rays, which damaged their ecological system, even if they had a greenhouse problem. By the way, the cross was a very important symbol of the Sumerians 3,000 years before Christ, who was crucified on Tau, the cross, and it symbolized the point of intersection, that is, the point where the orbit of Nibiru intersects the orbit of Earth. Even earlier, the ancient Indians also had the cross as one of their symbols. These are fully documented. Let's say it happens tomorrow, come and see. Antarctica ice slides, falls into the ocean, and you create a huge tidal wave that sweeps everything away. The water level rises by 50 meters, that's 150 feet, and continues to rise as the ice melts in the warmer sea. It can't happen? That's what you say? Sumerian writings do not agree with your optimism. By the way, neither the Old Testament agrees, nor Plato, nor the Magi of South America. So the cataclysm takes place, and of the 11th million Greeks, some 200,000 remain alive, and many are, but we are not. But we are generous. They put it on their feet, leaving helpless parents to drown like mice and climb the high mountains of Greece wherever they can. They have no paper with them, no pencil, no tape recorder. All they can carry with them is their terror. They stay up there until the water recedes, which can take a long time. With too much water, the climate changes violently. Storms are caused and ecological systems completely changed. They start eating whatever they find in front of them, and the rips will be a pleasant memory. They eat pine, they eat fir needles, they gnaw at cork. If they're lucky, they'll even find a lizard. They don't happen to like that, do they? After the first shock passes, after the man learns to live in caves, gets used to his new diet, and to serving his needs with water full of leeches, he begins to tell. Man has a thing for tradition and history. One tells a story to his child, who in turn tells it to his own child with some addition or omission, and so on. When man begins to construct huts, clothing, parchments, and clay tablets, he begins to record history as it has reached his ears. Some write, others copy, and after 5,000 or 10,000 years, in the era of some other civilization, their descendants read them and try to find a way out, often proposing a bunch of nonsense as an interpretation. So think, 6,000 years from now, historians of that time and civilization read a clay tablet or parchment that reads, "Iron birds with big ears and eyes fly to see people towards giants in the streets. Towering giants in the streets, they see and hear everything. The iron pipes of fire are in surrounding mountains. The lords attend the ancient sacred ceremony. Great anxiety prevails about the death blow. The waters are not yet defiled, nor the air." So come on, convince future scholars that the ancient texts refer to the 2004 Athens Olympic Games, security measures taken in the case of a terrorist attack, The iron birds are flying radars, giants were ruffian cameras, and the fire hoses and anti-aircraft patriots. Did you understand what's going on? Myths are real, the events of the distant past which have been altered or codified in a relay of the narrative. And so we read today he had created the weapons which was hurled like death. The 50 Anunnaki were beaten. The supreme fire, bird-like creature struck in the chest, Sumerian myth that is. So now if one considers that in Sumerian Anunnaki is those who descend to earth from heaven, one wonders what exactly are the Sumerians referring to? Much the same as the ancient Indians relate with the wondrous blues and reds sped with a roar to the range of the sky and were bathed in rays of light. Brilliant sky descending with lightning in their hands and helmets of gold in their heads. Lightning bolts in the hands? That reminds me of something. And someone else, Titian in Sumerian means he who lives in the sky. Have we heard these words anywhere else? Titian, Titan. Less linguists tell us that there are no common linguistic elements of Sumerian with any other language. The clay tablets and scrolls say more about Sumerian tradition, but let's take a guess. Say a clay tablet, male harlots comb their hair, they adorn their necks with colorful ribbons, they dress on the right side in women's clothes when they walk before the chaste Inanna. They cover their left side in men's clothes and they walk in front of pure Inanna. And the Sumerians had prostitutes and everything. They also had the aliens, though. These were the central part of their tradition. And we're not talking about water-boiled aliens, the ones that are now descending on Earth, and the Americans are running to block off the area because a dangerous virus has allegedly appeared that kills rabbits and gummies. The Sumerians speak of strange aliens, of chieftains who had come down to Earth when there was no life form and had made man by genetic multiplication. Nonsense, you say. Excuse me, that is, but was the folly of the Sumerian greater than the folly of the Hebrews with Yahweh making the Garden of Eden? Let's be fair and impartial. Read what the Sumerian script says. In those days, in the chamber of creation of the gods, in the house of modification, on the holy hill, Lahars, hairy oxen, and Ansans, cereals, were fashioned with beauty. The place was filled with food for the gods, with multiplication, multiplying them. Of the Lahars of the Anas and Anunnaki, those who descended to earth from heaven, ate in their sacred mound, but did not overeat. The Anunnaki drank the good milk from the sheep, but they did not drink it. There are more. After Anu, Enlil, Enki, and Sud created the black-headed people, do we have this in memory? And the whites who were created later, considered the black slaves and inferior, proliferated the flora on earth. With great art they made four-legged animals and put them in Eden, Edin. The Anglo-Saxon language Edom is spelled Eden and pronounced Eden. There are also something else strange but very important. For the sake of things that satisfy you, for the pure sheep, civilized humanity was created. Let civilized humanity learn how to cultivate the fields and how to keep the sheep for the sake of the gods. And let's not forget that Adam was also guardian of paradise. By civilized humanity, Nam Lu Gal Lu, the Sumerian means humanity that has reason. So let's look at something they wrote about their planet's intrusion into our solar system and its orbit around the sun before leaving again to return. Apsu is the sun in Sumerian. He crossed the heavens and counted the regions and calculated the layers of Apsu. The Lord measured the dimensions of Apsu. Lord, it is the planet unknown to us according to the Sumerians. Finishing with the Sumerians, let's take a look at the central theme of their tradition. Extraterrestrials had come down to Earth for some business. They had to eat, though. They created flora and fauna suitable for the production of cereals and other agricultural products, as well as for herbivorous animals to graze. They did not have the time and the inclination to deal with trivial things with everyday life. They needed servants and created man, first black and then white, by fertilizing an animal's egg with their own sperm. Conception took place outside the womb in tubes, while the first embryos were housed in the wombs of an alien woman. The experiments were not immediately successful. Images show human bodies with animal heads and vice versa. Perhaps in the end the experiment succeeded with the ovum of some animal that finally matched, maybe with a monkey egg. But be careful, and Greek mythology mentions beings that are half human and half animal, and the Egyptians, and it's not the Sumerians who say these things, but with serious study and analysis, there is no difference between the Genesis of the Old Testament and the Sumerians. Only the Sumerians documented them, with writings and awesome pictures showing rockets, pilots, genetic engineering chambers, maternity wards. They also mention a conflict between rival factions of aliens. Oops, who were the rivals? A terrible nuclear war, which Sitchin insists had left indelible scars on the Arabian Peninsula. Satellite photos do suggest an ancient, perhaps nuclear explosion of massive proportions. The issue, however, is not what one and the other said and how the Sumerian scriptures were interpreted, but what the Sumerians themselves said. Countless tablets and scrolls had been found in Sumer. In one excavation alone, over 30,000 have been found. Most remains untranslated. Sippar was a city very much associated with justice. Perhaps the Supreme Court or the Council of Sumerian State was located there. Utu was often mentioned, may have been a chief judge. A plaque states its principle: do no harm to your opponent, reward the good, the one who does you harm, deal with your enemy with justice, do not allow your heart to be carried away and do evil, give food to eat and wine to drink to one who begs for help, help others and do good. This was written about 2,500 years before Matthew mentioned the Sermon on the Mount. Do we care about others or not? We now go to the rebellion of the Anunnaki and the necessary creation of man. The Anunnaki were the aliens who had been forced to work in the gold mines in South Africa. When the gods did the work and suffered the toil as if they were men, the toil of the gods was great, the work very heavy, their exhaustion great. They complained, gossiped, and talked behind their backs, muttering in the mines. They said amongst themselves when the chieftain Enlil had visited the mines, "Let us go and face the first officer that he may relieve us of the heavy work. Let us cause concern to the king of the gods, the hero Enlil, in his camp." And finally, the mutiny was organized by an ex-mining officer who did not like his replacement. Let's declare war now. Let us combine hostilities with battle. And read now this strange piece, which was translated in 1912 and interpreted as a magical text. Quote, he had money, he made his as a weapon. He sprang forward like death. The 50 Anunnaki were beaten. The flying Su-Sar, which looked like a bird, was hit in the chest. What magic baby? Which bird like Su-Sar aircraft carrying 50 aliens is mentioned elsewhere as wearing helmets? What else did we want the Sumerians to write to admit that they were talking about air combat, maybe United States Air Force or RAF? Let's now look at the attitude of the rest of the gods, quote unquote, who had admitted the injustice that forced the Anunnaki to rebel. Why do we blame them? Their work was heavy, their exhaustion great. Every day the lamentation was great, and we heard their complaints. And so they made man to solve the problem of the Anunnaki. They created Lulu, that is, man as a primitive worker. And now that the goddess of birth is present, let her create a primitive worker, and let him wear a yoke. Let that burden of the gods be loaded. They called the goddess, the midwife of the gods, the wise Mami, and said to her, "You who are the goddess of birth, create workers." And they created primitive workers to carry the yoke that Enlil would set. The worker would be burdened with the toil of the goods of the gods. And what did Mami do? Work began on Simti's house, which from the descriptions looks like a modern-day hospital. She took the necessary sperm from the gods and together with other birth goddesses, perhaps surrogate wombs, began experiments and rehearsals that lasted a long time. They also had several failures. At the end, however, Mami cried out triumphantly, "I created him, my hands made him." So I'm thinking if aliens really exist, then the Sumerian tradition is credible. We who have only set a few sardines to the moon and a little beyond have a genetic machine, artificial insemination, and we also make clones. You can imagine the genetic engine of the civilization that came here to Earth from the constellation of Andromeda, the Pleiades, Sirius, or the 12th planet. I'll tell you one last thing so you will understand that the Sumerians knew things that could not have been known 5,000 years ago. We're talking about documented things. There's a large museum in formerly East Berlin. The State Museum was before Westerners met Easterners. In the museum, there is a wing called Vorderasiatische Abteilung, and whoever pronounced it first wins a commemorative plaque with Sumerian writings. In the Vorderasiatische Abteilung, there are many finds of Asian origin. One of the earliest is a scroll from the 3rd millennium BC, catalog number VA243. The scroll is mapping of our solar system. In the center is a large disk with rays, apparently the sun. Very close to the sun is a small disk, Mercury. A little further out is a larger one, which is Aphrodite, Venus that is, and beyond is another disk about the same size as the previous one, accompanied by a very small one, that's Earth and the Moon. Further out, a disk represents Mars. The scale is impressive. Mars in the cylinder is smaller than Earth, but larger than the Moon, and Mercury, just like in reality. And here's Saturn, here's Jupiter. Even further out are two disks that to scale perfectly represent the planets Uranus and Neptune. And finally, to blow our minds completely, there is also a small disk that is Pluto. Sit down, baby, and rather stand in awe. We did not know about Pluto until 1930, relatively not long ago. We did not know about Neptune and Uranus. How did the Sumerians know so many millennia ago? In the ancient scroll, however, there is an error regarding the position of Pluto. It's between Saturn and Uranus and not beyond Neptune, which is the position we know today. But the amazing thing about the scroll, the great riddle, is that it depicts an additional celestial body that we don't know about. It's considerably larger than Earth, but smaller than Jupiter and Saturn, and lies between Mars and Jupiter. Here we have a 4,500-year-old scroll, and put it completely depicts the solar system, both in terms of size and scale, and relative distances and positions of planets, perfect except for two things: the existence of an unknown planet and the position of the smallest planet, Pluto. Could the unknown planet be the one with the terribly elliptic orbit, the one whispering to come back soon? Could it be that in one of its transits through the solar system, the wandering planet threw Pluto into a new orbit beyond Neptune? Did some living on the mysterious planet tutor the Sumerians or their ancestors before they left to return? Let's take a look at the timeline it has arrived at. Sitchin about the arrival of extraterrestrials on Earth, the creation of man and the flood. 450,000 years ago, when Nibiru's atmosphere began to collapse, the dethroned king Alalu escaped in the spaceship and took refuge on Earth, and there he found gold, a necessary element to protect his planet's atmosphere. 445,000 years ago, the Nephilim, led by Enki, son of Anu, ruler of Nibiru, arrived on Earth from the 12th planet and established their first station in South Mesopotamia, Eridu, beginning to mine gold from the sea of today's Persian Gulf. 430,000 years ago, the glaciers begin to recede and the climate in the Near East begins to soften. 416,000 years ago, as gold production declined, Anu came to Earth with Enlil, his successor, and they decided to start gold mining in South Africa as well. 415,000 years ago, Enki advances inland and found Larsa. 400,000 years ago, the climate is temperate throughout the Earth, and Enlil establishes Nippur in the Mission Control Center. Enki organizes sea routes to South Africa, where gold mining begins. Note the Nephilim needed gold because their planet was experiencing greenhouse problem like Earth today. Gold particles scattered in the atmosphere of the 12th planet would reflect a percentage of the sun's rays. 360,000 years ago, the Nephilim established Bat Tibira as a metallurgical center, Sipar as a cosmodrome, and other centers. 300,000 years ago, the Anunnaki, the cosmonauts forced to work in the mines, stage a mutiny. Man is created by Enki and Nin-Hursag as a laborer to replace the Anunnaki in the mines as well as all other menial jobs. 250,000 years ago, man, Homo sapiens, multiplies and spills over to other continents. 200,000 years ago, life on Earth is regressing due to the new ice age. 100,000 years ago, the climate becomes temperate again. The sons of the gods take the daughters of men as wives. The aliens, that is, take the daughters of men like their creations, something like Enlil did not like at all. 77,000 years ago, Bartutu Lamech, a human with a human mother and a god father, becomes king of Surupak, patronized by the matriarch Nin-Hursag. 75,000 years ago, the curse of the earth strikes again. A new ice age begins. Humanity is regressing, and beastly men roam the earth. 49,000 years ago, the reign of Zeus-Sudra Noah, the faithful servant of Enki, begins. 38,000 years ago, harsh climatic conditions decimate humans. European Neanderthal man disappears. Only Cro-Magnon man survives in the Near East. Enlil, disillusioned with man, seeks his annihilation. 13,000 years ago, the Nephilim, known that the approach of their planet will cause a huge tidal wave on Earth, decide not to inform the humans and let them drown like mice. 11,000 years ago, Enki instructs Zeus-Sudra to build a special ship to save mankind from the cataclysm sweeping the Earth. The Anunnaki witness the cataclysmic phenomenon while orbiting the Earth in their spaceships. The deluge occurs, which abruptly ends the Ice Age, and Enlil gives the remaining humans tools and seeds so agriculture begins. Enki tames animals and adapts them to the new way of life. 10,500 years ago, the descendants of Zeus-Sudra were granted 3 territories, today's Mesopotamia, the Nile Valley, and Jerusalem, as the center of administration. 9,700 years ago, Ra-Marduk, firstborn son of Enki, divides Egypt between the descendants of Osiris and Seth. 9,300 years ago, Seth seizes power from Osiris and is left alone in ruling the Nile Valley. 8,970 years ago, Horus avenges his father Osiris by declaring the start of the First Pyramid War. Seth escapes to Asia, occupies the Sinai Peninsula in the land of Canaan. 8,670 years ago, Enlil's followers declare the Second Pyramid War, and the victory, Ninurta empties the Great Pyramid of his equipment. 8,500 years ago, Jericho, one of the cities founded to act as thrusters to the central gate to space. 7,400 years ago, the peaceful era between the Anunnaki and humans continues. The Neolithic period begins and the demigods dominate Egypt. 3,800 years ago, urban civilization begins in Sumeria, and the Anunnaki re-establish the old cities there, beginning with Eridu and Nippur. Anu visits Earth. A new city, Uruk, the biblical Erech, is built in his honor. 3,760 years ago, kingship is granted to humans. Kis is the first capital under the patronage of Ninurta. The calendar starts from Nippur. Civilizations flourish in Sumeria, the first region. 3,450 years ago, Marduk declares Babylon the gate of the gods. The Tower of Babel is built where the Anunnaki confuse the languages of the people. 3,100 years ago, 350 years of chaos end with the pharaohs settling in Memphis. Civilization begins in the second region. 2,900 years ago, the kingdom of Sumeria is transferred to Erech. Inanna is given the rulership of the third region, and thus the Indus Valley civilization begins. Amazing stuff. If we see other probable and improbable stories of other people, and then with the strict criticism we make a clarification, and with what is left logically compose a story, it's very likely that it will illuminate and expand the horizon of our mind a little more. And yes, according to Sitchin's timeline, Ninhursag, Enki, and Enlil have lived many thousands of years. Weird. Not so much. An average person lives, say, 75 years. This means that during his lifetime, the Earth had revolved around the Sun 75 times correctly. Such is the metabolism which is linked to the rate of rotation of the Earth around the Sun. But if the same is the case for the inhabitants of the 12th planet, and since one revolution of their planet around the Sun takes 3,600 years of Earth, due to its terribly elliptical orbit, then one of their timelines is 3,600 years of theirs, us. Maybe this is where the centenarians and immortals come from, as far as the demigods leave it. Of course, Sitchin leaves some questions unanswered, and at first glance it seems that his theory is missing somewhere. And I say this because anyone who reads his book, The 12th Planet, wonders how Sitchin, reading the Sumerian tablets, did not catch some contradictions in the texts, or if he did perceive them, most likely, if not absolutely certain, why did he let them slip into his book like that without pointing them out or even explaining them, unless he had his reasons, which only he knows. Let's look at some of the contradictions. The purpose of the aliens' visit to Earth was to mine gold for the need of their planet, which was suffering from greenhouse effect. That is, scattering gold shavings in their upper atmosphere, they reflect part of the sun's rays, limiting the phenomenon. But their planet, with its huge elliptical orbit, takes 3,600 years to orbit the sun, and is not visible with modern telescopes. If you consider that Pluto, the 11th planet, is the most distant planet of our sun, that is visible with modern telescopes, has a very low surface temperature, many degrees below zero, and the sun from its surface appears as a bright star, how is Nibiru, the 12th planet, suffering from the greenhouse effect? Isn't that kind of strange? As for Nibiru's temperature, he settles the matter by saying that the planet itself generates heat, which due to the planet's immense gravity does not escape into space. But what about the lightning? Have they had night for over 3,000 years? The lighting, because they don't have any sun. And since passing every 3,600 years from our lures, it creates enormous disasters, as implied by his book with the fears he expresses about the imminent arrival of Nibiru. Why is only one cataclysm mentioned and not 60 or 70 or 100 floods, or even major or minor disasters? And the Nephilim, who first came to Earth 450,000 years ago, every 3,600 years to escape the effects of Nibiru's approach, would get into their spaceship and circle the Earth, and then come back down to Earth and rebuild facilities and dam it in the beginning, and people, all but one, Noah, died every 3,600 years. In his book, The 12th Planet, he states that the flood and the disasters happened only once around 10,000 BC. Therefore, according to the logic of the numbers, the next flood will occur after at least 440,000 years, so why worry now? It also states that the Nephilim entered their spaceship and roamed around Earth until the floods passed. During their stay in space, they did not have the best living conditions. They were cramped, thirsty, and generally suffering. Why didn't they go to Nibiru, their planet, which was at that time the closest to Earth, but suffered so much spinning around the Earth? In Nibiru, there are no effects during its passage because the planet Jupiter, Mars, etc. Is Sitchin not telling us everything very well, or rather, what is Sitchin trying not to tell us, and why? So as you can see, The 12th Planet, Sitchin's book, has a lot of contradictions. Please leave your comment. Thank you for your support. I've translated this for you from a Greek article. Thank you. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.